Okay, so we're looking at Vietnam again, and in order to understand Vietnam, you definitely have to understand about the Viet Cong, which was one of the two enemies that the United States fought against in the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong, which used guerrilla tactics, unconventional warfare, booby traps, and stuff like that, and the North Vietnamese Army. And so right now, I found this really interesting video I want y'all to take a look at. It's actual footage from the Viet Cong themselves. So it's crazy. It reminds me so much of how like the Taliban and Al Qaeda and all these groups filmed their attacks against us. So it's 16 minutes long. So I'm not even sure we're gonna be able to see all of it if you even watch the whole of it. But it's pretty cool. It shows booby traps and how they make them and all this kind of stuff. But check it out.
The enemy in Vietnam is all too often invisible, striking without warning from the shadows. But tonight, the face of the enemy in rare films of the Viet Cong in action. The film was shot by a communist cameraman, processed in Vietnam, taken to Paris for editing, now shown for the first time on American television. Charles Perrault, who has covered Vietnam's war in the field, is the narrator.
This is propaganda film, properly heroic as propaganda film should be. But under the layers of singing warriors marching gaily to battle, there are also some truths about the enemy in South Vietnam. Some truths about the kind of enemy which uses as weapons the terrain and the night and the weather, which has proved that sampans and even, in some circumstances, bicycles can be used to better effect than tanks. And an enemy which has waged a markedly successful war against the larger force which we train. This is an enemy which steals from us the weapons of the 20th century and supplements them with the weapons of the 16th century, the crossbow. The spear launcher.
Excuse me. Sorry. You may be wondering, like, why would you want to use a crossbow or a spear launcher or something like that? But if you don't, if you haven't already thought of it right now, since I brought it up, it's because they're quiet. Okay, I can kill, a few. Or I can kill one guy. I mean, just it gives you the ability to kill Americans without letting them know where you're at.
The spike. And the man trap. No correspondent who has ever ventured into the South Vietnamese countryside doubts the effectiveness of these lethal traps. They make you careful where you step. That's the idea. This music, by the way, came with the film. This is a smaller model of the man trap for 1 foot only. There are hundreds of thousands of these things along the jungle trails. Carefully covered over, weathered down, they're invisible. And they do their damage. On many a jungle path in South Vietnam, if you trip on a vine, you may release such a booby trap as this one, the porcupine. Lifted high up into the trees, this thing can sweep a whole squad from a trail. This is a bomb of spikes, fashioned to drop from above. The Viet Cong have become adept not only at moving fast themselves, but at slowing the Vietnamese army down. These bamboo spikes can pierce a GI boot, and do. These are irregular troops of the Viet Cong, people from the villages in the universal black peasant costume, the kind of enemy very hard to know, who can fight for the Viet Cong at night and slip back into the villages in the daylight. Those may be villages supposedly controlled by the South Vietnamese.
That's another example of unconventional warfare, is not having uniforms, wearing civilian clothing, looking like the rest of the civilian population, so that you can escape easily, and eventually you're going to make the Americans do something like, just lose it and just kill civilians because they're confused or they're angry at the Viet Cong and they can't tell who the Viet Cong is. And so that helps your purpose as well, because it's going to make more people upset at the Americans, and so help you kill them.
Supposedly. But the Viet Cong are able to acquire actual mock-ups of the fortified villages of the government, mock-ups on which they can plan surprise attacks. Those attacks are usually carried out by the Viet Cong regulars, uniformed, well hidden, usually armed with mortars and automatic weapons captured down the years from the French and the Americans, usually well trained. The professional army, which emerges from foxholes and tunnels to do battle, and which in the Vietnamese War has proved more than a match for the crack combat troops of the South, the American-advised Vietnamese Rangers. Many of the sequences in this communist propaganda film were obviously staged for the cameraman. Some were obviously not. This is the kind of enemy which advances unseen, dodges patrols, cuts through barbed wire barricades, harasses American helicopter pilots. This happens every day. It is also, incidentally, the kind of enemy which can carry heavy explosives to the very walls of American Army barracks filled with American soldiers. That happened in Pleiku night before last. And the kind of enemy which can bring down American planes, firing from unseen positions in the forest. Communist sources who provided this film say this is the wreckage of an American helicopter shot down 1 month ago, January 9th.
This is crazy because it's exactly how the Taliban does it. They shoot down a helicopter or Al Qaeda or whatever. They definitely film it and they put up on, or back then they didn't have the internet obviously, but they said at the beginning of the video this is sent to Paris, which was sent out to the media. But this is crazy how much it reminds me of that.
It is a cardinal principle of guerrilla warfare that you strip the battlefield clean of weapons. The Viet Cong always do. Only the South Vietnamese army dead are left here. The Viet Cong, dead and wounded whenever possible, are carried away after the battle. Women do that work. Women sometimes do that work for the South Vietnamese army as well. It is likely that they are sometimes the same women. The flag says, determined to win. It's interesting to note that day before yesterday, before the raid on Camp Holloway, the Viet Cong attackers had infiltrated a village 1,000 yards from the airstrip, and not a single villager informed the Americans. Villagers understandably applaud for and provide food to whichever side seems to protect them best. These
Same way as Afghanistan and the Taliban.
so obviously posed are true enough. In much of the countryside, the Viet Cong are welcomed on the American gangster protection principle. This film, which we repeat is a Viet Cong propaganda film, makes life in the jungle seem a breeze. It is actually other than that. Not all Viet Cong soldiers sleep at night in comfortable hammocks made from parachutes. Most communist troops are very young as 14 or 15. They are pale from weeks in the jungle, they are very often hungry, and their lives must be exhausting. They cannot be imagined to receive mail from home very often. But frankly, they are making our life more miserable even than their own. Charles Carroll, CBS News. These are the faces of the enemy, the leaders of the Viet Cong, the strategists of the hit-and-run jungle war which has kept the United States itself on the defensive. The rarely seen chief of the Viet Cong, Nguyen Phu To. For the propaganda film, he says, "We will fight on for the absolute victory of peace, democracy, and national liberation." Members of the Viet Cong Central Committee. Nguyen Van Noi, a member of the Cao Dai sect. Tik Hong Tu, a Buddhist. And Ho Hui Bu, identified as a Roman Catholic, leader of the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong headquarters is in no one place. It moves constantly, and when it moves, it takes its defense force with it. These pictures, while obviously posed for the camera, still do depict the extremes of mobility which the Viet Cong rely upon for concealment. From the air, these are peaceful fishing boats in the Mekong Delta. But they actually are the general headquarters of the Communist forces, the Viet Cong Pentagon. South Vietnamese counterintelligence worries a lot about the location of the communist underground radio. Well, here it is. Or there it was. It moves too. Aboard another boat, a two-color handbill press, made, the communists say, by copying some old plans from a Japanese catalog. You come across these handbills in every village in the countryside. On still other boats, secretaries. Secretaries with typewriters, obviously pleased to have their pictures taken. And a communications boat, some of its equipment American-made and captured from the Vietnamese army. On November 24th, 1963, at Giep Hoa, only 20 miles west of Saigon, 300 of these Viet Cong guerrillas infiltrated a South Vietnamese army camp and, on a signal from a bugle, suddenly opened fire. 36 government soldiers were killed, 26 more wounded, and after 40 minutes, the Viet Cong withdrew after seizing machine guns, rifles, and mortars like these. After the action, 4 American advisors were listed as missing and presumed captured. They were captured, as this film shows. The Communists and the Defense Department agree on their names. Kenneth Roraback, Sergeant First Class, whose wife Veronica lives in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Isaac Camacho, Sergeant First Class of El Paso, Texas. Claude McClure, Specialist Fifth Class, whose wife Rita lives in Chattanooga. And Sergeant George Smith of Chester, West Virginia. The Defense Department says they were captured in the midst of fierce hand-to-hand combat in the camp at Giep Hoa. They have been captives of the Communists and presumably constantly moving through the Vietnamese countryside for 15 months. Their ordeal committed to film now by the enemy in South Vietnam.
Okay, and so that's just that's a pretty good video about the Viet Cong right there. I like that a lot. Definitely talks about the different tactics they use, how they use there's a very good example of unconventional force, and so that's why I wanted to show you in that film. And so anyway, so that's the Viet Cong, which is one of the communist enemies we face in the Vietnam War. The other was the North Vietnamese Army.